Well, welcome to A Word with Kelly Scott Reed, where we'll be doing some interviews with our writers that have submitted and been published with the blog, as well as any guests that want to come along. Today, we're talking with François Bereaud, one of our multi-published folks, where we've done way more than one of his works. How are you? Welcome.
I'm great. I am thrilled and honored to be here. Love the press.
Thank you so much. That's really kind of you to say. We are very proud of it. We love it. And we're forming such a wonderful community, and you are part of that. So this is really exciting to be able to speak with you. I'm going to ask a few questions, kind of personal questions, how you became a writer. They're going to change every once in a while. These first groupings of questions I'm asking, I picked out and said, all right, let's do these. But then we might change them up, and we might have other interviews and with other folks, as well as you, if you ever wanted to come back. So the first one I'm going to ask is for you to introduce yourself and where you're from and how you became a writer.
So I'm François Bereaud. I currently live in San Diego. Been here more than 20 years, but I grew up not too far from where you guys are in Ithaca, central New York. So I see your pictures of snow, and I do remember that. And I got my French name because my father was French, and I did spend a couple of years there. My father was a professor, and so I had some time in France as a kid, and try to get back there when I can. How did I become a writer? I was thinking about that one. So I guess it's kind of a classic story. I had a great teacher in 5th and 6th grade. I had the same teacher, Mrs. Cohen. Very tough, very demanding, and I was pretty good at school, very academically oriented, and also probably a total smartass and kind of a jerk. And I teach math now, which people find surprising, and so math was easy for me. But I remember that she really pushed us to write, and I wrote a lot of reports. I wrote about Da Vinci, I wrote about gorillas, I think I wrote one on Pluto, and I wrote a long story about a tower that I had seen in France. We went that summer of 5th grade to see my grandparents, and both my father and stepmother had family in France, and it was just this tower in the middle of nowhere, and it, of course, provoked a lot of questions. And so that was probably my first story. It's lost to time, but I remember her giving me stuff back, and that was crazy. Like, well, what do you mean? That's, if it was a math paper, it would have been 100, right? I would never have to redo it because that's, at that point I was pretty good at that stuff. But she was tough, and she said, well, that's not your best work, right? Or, that's a fine, first draft. So I hadn't thought about her in a long time, but I really have to credit that. And then it went dormant for a long, long time. But I think that was the genesis, was Miss Cohen, 5th and 6th grade, Bell Sherman Elementary.
That's awesome. I really I had a very tough English teacher in high school, Mr. Capini. And at the time, he would sit there with a cigarette. This is in the 80s. Cigarette with his coffee in the front of a classroom, smoking and drinking coffee, and just pushing us and pushing us. And it was so exciting for me because I love a challenge anyway. I don't know if you're that type of person. If I'm not challenged, I don't bother. It's a really weird thing. But if someone's like, I need more, this isn't good enough, that's when I like to amp myself and up my game. So I think that's kind of interesting. But it was an English teacher as well who kind of would push it back with a cigarette and his coffee stains on the paper and say, not good enough. But yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. So what was an early experience where you learned that language had power?
Well, I'll give you two quick ones that relate to my father. So my father he was not a writer, but he was a literature professor, literature and language professor at university. And so obviously well-read. And well, I'll concentrate on one. So we were in France when I was in 9th grade, and I met a girl. And the girl actually was the stepdaughter of my dad's first cousin. So not related, let's just be clear. And sort of hit it off, and then I went back to the States. So and then I spent 2 years writing letters to her. So that was really, this was We had a phone, of course. I'm not that old, but you didn't just pick up the phone and call Europe, right? God knows
No.
what that was called, right? So we wrote weekly letters. I saw her once in those 2 years when we went back to France. And at the end of my junior year, I had enough money somehow to buy myself a ticket. And so she invited me to her grandparents' summer house in the Mediterranean. And that her grandparents were not my family. That was her, it was only the stepdad who was technically my family. And so I told my father, and the invitation said, you can come, but, they were probably concerned about their daughter's, purity. And they invited me to stay at the campground about a mile away. So I would spend the days at their house, and then I would go to the campground. And for me, that was fine. I was, I was like gaga over this girl. I wasn't having much luck stateside. And so I told my dad, and my dad flew into a rage. It was like, this is family. They can't put you up at a campground. This is wrong. I'm writing these people. And he knew them, but not well. And again, they weren't technically his family. And the grandfather actually had, sorry, this is turning into a longer story, but it's kind of a good one. He was in the French Resistance and literally killed Nazis in the war. I mean, he was a tough guy, the guy that, was the patriarch of this house. And so my dad said, give me the address, I'm writing them. You can't really defy your father. So I gave him the address, and I was just like, he's ruining this, right? I'm like, Dad, I'm paying for this trip. I'm not asking you for anything. I'm just telling you that, trying to tell you that I'm going. So he sends this letter off, and I just, didn't breathe for about 3 weeks. The letter comes back, and it said, your son is welcome in our house. And I never knew what my dad put in there, right? But it was like the power of language, right? The power of whatever he did, right? And I went for a month, and stayed in the guest room and was treated like family. And so that awesome. Experience, many years ago now. And I never even asked my dad what he wrote, but obviously what he wrote,
That's funny. I relate to that. We had a friend who he won't see this because he never watches what I do, but he had decided he was mad at us, my husband and I. They were in a band together. It's like all this crazy stuff. And he wrote a letter to us, and it came in the mail. And my husband was, there's a letter from so-and-so. And I go, don't open it. And he's like, what? I should open it. I go, don't open it. He's mad. He's saying stuff, and it will never be the same. So he ripped the letter, and we never opened it. They're still friends this day. They've been friends since they were in 11th grade. And sometimes, in an instinct that you're going to write something that could really hurt somebody.
Right.
And when we knew we were going to stay friends, why go there? But I think that's funny. We did the opposite. We didn't open the letter. Maybe they didn't either. Maybe they looked at it and said, uh-oh, he's mad. So we were just going to let him see. Who knows? All right. We'll move on. What is your writing kryptonite?
I had to look up kryptonite. Make sure I was using it in the right sense, put it that way. So I guess it's when I feel down. I want it, I don't do this for a living. I know very few people, I suppose, do this for, really a living, but, it's not it's not what I do for a living. Right. And so I want to just write when I feel not necessarily happy, but good about writing. Right. And when it's not forced. And somehow I got through an MFA program, which took me 5 years because it was a kind of a long program. I was part-time. And I told myself I would drop if it felt forced, right? If I ever felt unhappy doing it. And I never did, which I was somehow, looking back, I was surprised about. So I try to write, it's not saying I'm writing when I'm happy, but I don't like to write when I'm down. But that's tough because, these last few years, there's not necessarily personally, but there's so many things to feel down about and feel sad about. And, whether it's people marching, whether it's Nazis marching and, in the United States right now, yesterday, whether it's, worried about the planet for my children, which I spent, maybe not enough time or maybe too much time doing. So I'm trying to figure out kind of how to channel that sometimes, that there's just days I'm going to feel overwhelmed by stuff, and that shouldn't stifle, hopefully not stifle that creativity, and maybe challenge it, maybe channel it into my writing somehow. And I think one of the pieces that you guys published, The Men Who Crossed the Border, was a little bit of that, seeing folks who I know are struggling, right? I mean, it cannot be an easy life sitting at Home Depot hoping that someone picks you up for, whatever a day laborer's fee is. And I have empathy for that, right? And it's and of course, living in the city, you see much worse. I used to go for a bike ride before this interview, and kind of rode my bike through Tent City, right, just a mile away from here, on a trail. So maybe using writing as a way to process some of that, and not let it just completely stifle me.
Yeah, that's really so. And I think this is interesting because you're saying, you write when you're in a good space. I know for me, I write very differently from who I am in my interpersonal self. I'm a pretty bubbly person. Everybody knows I'm pretty positive. 99% of the time I'm in a good mood. I'm fortunate. I wake up in a pretty good mood every day. But when I write, I'm a pretty dark person. That's how I get that side of me out. So having your perspective is really interesting to me. I think that's a really healthy way to be personally. I think it's wonderful. And I think it does show through in your writing in general. I find that very interesting. This is why I love doing this interview stuff, because I love to hear about how people come to their process and how what inspires them. And it's so different from person to person. There's no writer. There's no someone who's just a writer. It's always, I do it because of, or in spite of, that kind of added. I love it. I'm sorry. This is going to be forever long because I'm going to keep talking to you. I'm sorry. All right. If you didn't write, what would you do to express your creativity?
Oh boy. That's a tough one. Probably something visual. I love music, and I have tried and failed at several instruments. So I just don't think I have I know that most of it is effort. I get that. I teach. I tell my students that, but I feel with music I have zero innate ability. In fact, it's quite the opposite. So probably it's something like painting or maybe photography.
Do you have any paintings
I don't feel like
that you've worked on?
No, I'm actually sitting in a room. You can see that this is sort of our art room. And so there's some family work.
I got some art here too.
Yeah.
I'm like looking at you.
And I'm actually, and then what you can't see facing, there's more. My daughter is a painter, or one of the things she does. And so I have some work, and there's a piece by my aunt. So there's a lot in my family, but no, really writing is where I get out that creative part.
Do you have any, okay, here's something weird. If you could have written any song. See, I write songs. So my husband is in a band and I write songs with him. If there was a song you could have written, what would it have been? If you like music, so there's got to be a song you go, oh, this is it.
Oh, well, Neil Young has been in the news lately, and I saw him in Rochester many, many, many moons ago.
Oh my God, that's
college.
like a fantasy.
And I love him, and one of my favorite songs of his is Powderfinger. I love songs that have stories. I mean, you can think of Tangled Up in Blue, Bob Dylan. I mean, there's many. Living for the City, Stevie Wonder. Those three, songs kind of come to mind. But there's this in the song. There's a journey, and I still don't know if I really understand Powderfinger. And of course, you can go online and look at theories, but that's not really that important. But the song itself takes you on a journey. So a song like that would be a song I would have loved to have written.
That's awesome. Very cool. All right. What is the most difficult part of your process, your writing process for you?
Obviously, it's tempting to say all of it. Probably revision, or having the ability to see like a big revision. I tend to write pretty slowly, and so most things that I write, sometimes it's not every day. Sometimes it might take me longer than I would think many people would, and so I'll read the whole thing every time I start. Right? It wasn't true with my novel, but with stories, I write slow enough. And so I'm kind of revising as I go, but then when I'm done, I feel like I'm done. And nothing is really ever done. Everything can be improved. I understand that, but I have a hard time seeing, I just got some feedback on a story, from a journal. And of course it was very, well, not of course. Let me take that back. Most rejections are form rejections. But this one talked about how it was very engaging at the beginning, but felt like it went on too long, and could use a serious edit. Now, of course, that's just one person or one group's opinion, and so they could be wrong, right? Other people might feel differently. But I have trouble seeing what that might be. So yeah, that's my biggest struggle.
Very good. Well, we only have one more question, and that question is the surprise question. So I listen to a lot of podcasts, but one question that is in the podcast was, where do you find freedom, or where do you feel most free in your life? Is there an activity? Is there something that you engage in that brings you freedom to just be you? It's kind of a wishy-washy question. But for example, I think Tiff might agree with me. We found freedom in a job that is the most mundane, horrible job. And we did that through the blog and through working together with Marianne. The three of us sit in a room doing our work while doing this blog and having this really wonderful experience. And we found this sense of freedom in that. So now we're not just going to work. We have this little wonderful thing that lights us up a little bit. So how about you?
Boy, that's not that much of a softball. I guess the first thing that occurs to me is physical activity outdoors. I'm a pretty rabid exerciser, and I also I do some team sports. I still play hockey, but I really am happy on my own. My wife will say, "Oh, you could call up so-and-so to bike with that person," and I don't really want to. I agree. It's not necessarily that I don't want to. I kind of don't want to, right? Or I don't want to lose biking alone, put it that way, right? If I have 2 bike rides a week, I don't know if I'd want to give one up with someone else. And so I feel really free. I went for an hour ride, and just the physical part of it, there's a people watching element. And then on days when I don't bike, I walk. The other day I walked 11 miles. Over multiple walks, and my wife and I took a lovely hike, and that was great. But then, I don't know, later in the day I had some time and the kids were occupied, and watch another 4 miles. And I love
that.
Observing the world
after my own heart.
Yeah. And being outdoors. And that it really mental health too. I want to ask somebody, someone I work with who's a biologist, and her family got COVID over the break, and fortunately it was mild and we recovered. And I'm like, now, if I get this, am I allowed to walk around at night because I not see anybody? Because obviously there was a lot of anxiety about it, and now vaccinated, I feel like, okay, I'll be fine if I get it. But one anxiety was like, if I don't leave my house, I'm just gonna
lose it.
Right.
100%. I agree with you. I am someone who does that as well. Like I walk many miles with my dog, and Marianne has herself a husky as well, so she's walking, and Tiffany walks and runs, and for me that's also a freedom. Like also during the pandemic when you could do nothing else, I was always the only person in these woods. Like it was kind of awesome. I actually did a little story that we published, I think, in the first run, of where my whole entire family was gone. It was just me and the dog. And it was like, wow, there's some hidden stuff there. But no, that's awesome. And I just love it if you would plug some stuff you're working on, anything you've got in the pipeline, just for people to know about.
Well, I did a lot of writing over a 5 or 6 year period. I've written shorter things lately. But my current, dream, I have a collection of stories that, not very exciting title, but San Diego stories. I think it's 8 stories. One of them you guys published, tagging, because that took place right up the street, was the can't remember if I sent you guys the picture of the actual tag. Maybe I did, or maybe I put it on Twitter. And so it's just a collection of stories that all revolve around San Diego, which is not, I don't think, thought of as a literary. You think San Diego, I know before I moved here, it's like, well, there's a zoo and there's the beach and there's SeaWorld, but there's, it's a city. There's, I mean, it's humanity. There's a lot of things that go on here too. And I've, been fortunate to connect with lots of different people through my teaching and some of my community work. So my dream is to get that published as a collection. And I think out of the 8 stories in novella, 4 stories have been published. So I feel like, there's been some good feedback, that it might be ready. And so I'm pushing that places. So anyone listening to this wants to publish a collection of stories.
That's what I'm saying.
It's here, it's ready, and I want to see it up. There's a lovely bookstore up the street, and I think that's in my bio. I want to see it on display there.
Very cool. Well, Francois, this has been super fun for us. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's a delight. You guys are delightful. You just are.
Thank you. You're so nice.
That's my kids. My kids tell me I'm a grumpy old man. So
Oh no. Well, my kids say the same to me. So I think there's part of us that needs to be curmudgeon-y a little bit.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time. I will let you know when this is I'll email you with when this will be up.
Okay.
And they're not necessarily in order. I got to do some edits and stuff like that and figure all that stuff out because I'm new to all this technology. So